We are live. We are on. All right. So let me click over and I will first say thank you everybody for joining me. I am Celeste Williams, a family nurse practitioner and former Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress. And I thought it would be great to have a conversation about the COVID-19 vaccine, its safety, who gets it. Certainly COVID has been a terrible pandemic that has harmed people both physically, but also had great economic harm as well, and affected everyone globally across the United States, and certainly here in the state of Arkansas. And I am joined by my dear friend, co-worker and colleague, Dr. Lance Faddis, who has had the pleasure of working with me for the last decade. And he is a wonderful friend, a brilliant physician, and someone that I trust a lot, and certainly a smart guy who's gonna share his thoughts on the vaccine with us. So thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Celeste. I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you for taking the time to get these message out to folks. I think it's a really important message to get out.
It is. So we have a number of questions we're going to go through here. And certainly if anyone has a question who is watching right now, you can either send me a direct message or post it just under the video here, and we'll try to get to it. And if we don't, then I'll try to at least post an answer to your questions. So in the last month, we certainly had some really good news with two vaccines being authorized for use here in the United States. And so I'll start by asking, did you get your vaccine? And if you did, which one did you get and why did you choose that? Or was it a choice?
So I did. In fact, I will get my second dose of the vaccine tomorrow. So it's been 21 days since I had the first dose. I received the Pfizer vaccine. Really, so far, there hasn't been a lot of choice as far as which vaccine you get. It's pretty much whatever becomes available. And here in Northwest Arkansas, inside the healthcare community, it's primarily been the Pfizer vaccine that's been available to our healthcare providers. There are a few other providers in Arkansas who have got the Moderna vaccine. I think a lot of those are federal workers, but the majority of folks outside of that community have gotten the Pfizer vaccine.
So we have certainly seen a lot of frontline workers getting their vaccine. And so who will be next, and what kind of time frame do you think this will be accomplished in?
So we're still in the category 1A, according to the Arkansas Department of Health, the way they've laid that out. So that's still healthcare workers and first responders is primarily where we are in category 1A. We here are getting through most of that category fairly quickly. And so for us, I think we'll be able to be out of that category really fairly soon. I think the goal inside the state, as the governor laid out this last week, is to be out of that 1A category by the end of the month and then be into the 1B category. When you get into that 1B category, you're going to see folks who are older or 70 years or older, some other essential workers, teachers, those types of folks that'll be in line for the vaccine next. The plan right now, according to the Arkansas Department of Health and the way they think that's going to roll out, is that's going to take about a month to get those folks. And that's a significant number of folks. I think in 1A, there was something around 200,000 folks that would be in that 1A category with healthcare providers, some of the nursing home residents. And then when you rolled on down to 1B category, it's another 400,000 folks. And so it jumps every time. It gets a little bigger as far as the categories that they're providing. So it's 1A, 1B, 1C. They are laying out about a month to get all of those done. That's their goal. I think as we move through the process, we'll get better at vaccinating larger and larger groups of people. And we're certainly in the planning stages for that. How do we begin to work through that vaccine in the community? And it's a big logistical challenge to figure out how to do those things. But we've certainly had those conversations, continue to have those conversations on an almost daily basis for how we roll this out across the different aspects of the community.
Yeah, there's really not been a lot of infrastructure in place to make all of that happen. And certainly historically, it's been a long time since we had a huge vaccine campaign like this. So we have heard a lot of concern expressed in just news reports and such about the rollout of the vaccine. And so why do you think that people feel like it's slow? And do you think this process will get better?
I do. I mean, and it has been slow. I mean, we've had about, I think across the country, there's 15 to 17 million, depending on who you read, vaccines that have become available in this first period. And we've only given about 5 million, maybe a little less than that. So probably we're at a third of what's available to be given across the country. So that's a little disheartening that happened, that we haven't been able to make that happen faster. But if you look at where we have been in the last 4 or 5 days, we're vaccinating more and more people every day. So that the number of people that we're actually getting the vaccine in their arms is increasing every day. And it's been over, right around or a little over 500,000 people a day for the last 4 or 5 days. And so I think we're getting better as we move forward. I think some of it was just a timing thing. Frankly, I mean, when a vaccine comes out in the middle of the holidays, which is really where it got rolled out, I mean, anything is more difficult during the holidays. And we even, saw that here locally, just from a staffing standpoint. A lot of the critical people were not here, out of town, and you don't know when that stuff's coming in, so it's hard to plan around. So I think that's been a lot of it, at least locally I've seen, and then nationally I think there's probably been some shipping issues as well. But I think we are beginning to get those things worked out, it sounds like. And I'm certainly encouraged that across the nation, it looks like we're giving more and more vaccines every day. And I see that continuing to improve.
It was certainly a wonderful Christmas gift, but hard to get it out during that time. So I personally really want public schools to be prioritized. I want my kids to be able to safely be in school. So we want to make sure that schools are a priority, and school staff are in part of that 1B category. So that should be February-ish. What about kids? Will they be able to get this vaccine?
So currently, the vaccines that are available are not, haven't been studied specifically in children, specifically children under the age of 16. They were excluded from the study. So there's a lot we don't know about that age group as far as how they would handle the vaccine, what they would need to do to get it effectively. Now, those studies are underway now, and there are folks that are looking at that, but we don't have that data yet. And so we really can't say much about the safety. The good news is kids typically do really well with coronavirus, and that's the great news about it. I mean, certainly there are exceptions to that, and there are, we can talk about stories where that's not been the case, but those have been the exception, not the rule. And most kids have done pretty well with the coronavirus, particularly the younger kids. And so I think that's the good news, the silver lining in that. But the studies are ongoing now as to what is the correct dose for children, how are they to tolerate the vaccine, and all those sort of things. And so that the safety and efficacy of that will be worked out, I think, in the next 6 months or so, and we'll have a better idea of what we need to do with the kids.
Well, I look forward to that. I want to stop worrying about my kids getting it and giving it to their teachers, and certainly I'll feel much better about their teachers being able to get the vaccine and giving them some protection.
I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be a really good deal when we're able to get the teachers. I particularly feel for them and for what they're doing in the community. I think they are, certainly on the front lines of this every day.
Yes.
and school nurses are in the 1A group, and so trying to work through those folks and getting those folks the vaccine, but certainly excited to be able to do that for the teachers as well.
Mm-hmm. So this has been the fastest vaccine rollout in history. Do you feel confident that the vaccine is safe and that all of the proper steps were taken to ensure safety and efficacy? And was this sort of the normal process followed for this approval?
So the normal process was followed, but it was just followed in a different category. It's more stacking rather than a linear fashion is the way I sort of think about it. And so, the part of the vaccine trial that gives you the element of safety and efficacy is the phase 3 trial. Phase 1 and phase 2 trials, they're looking at dose. They're looking at, hey, it's not toxic enough to really harm anybody right up front. So those are very small trials, and really they don't tell us that much about safety and efficacy of a vaccine. They give us some broad view, but not a very specific view of efficacy and safety. So when you get to that phase 3 trial, phase 1 and 2, you're talking about a few thousand, a couple of hundred people maybe in some of this. When you get to the phase 3 trial, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people. So 30,000 in this case, 30,000 person trials to get to the phase 3 portion of it. And so, but no one does that phase until they're completely through with everything else, because nobody wants to blow a few $1 million or $1 billion on a vaccine that doesn't work. And so I think, to their credit, we had entities that stepped in and guaranteed that portion. And so the vaccine companies were not at risk for going ahead and developing the vaccine. And so they were able to do the phase 3 trials stacked on top of one another rather than in a linear fashion. And so that's why things went by so fast. The other thing that really is important is, if you're going to prove efficacy, you have to have disease. And so if we were going to bring to market, let's say, a chickenpox vaccine, and you had to prove that chickenpox vaccine was effective. Well, presently, we have very few cases of chickenpox in the United States every year. And so in order to prove that you had an effective vaccine, it would take you a long time, and it would take you, probably having to vaccinate 500,000 people to figure out that you actually had an effective vaccine over a long period of time. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We've got lots of folks with coronavirus.
We unfortunately have a plethora of that.
Yeah, so we've got plenty of folks to vaccinate to prove that we have efficacy. And so that's really the big deal. In science for the win here. They really have knocked it out of the park and been able to come in and to analyze this stuff effectively, and to develop use technology that's been around a while, but had never been brought to bear in this kind of fashion. And so it's really an exciting thing to see.
It is certainly gives me hope for the future and makes me really proud to be part of the scientific and medical community. I think it's an amazing accomplishment. So I had my first vaccine, as you did, and I get my second one tomorrow. So at this point, what kind of protection do I have with my one dose of the vaccine, and what should I expect after my second dose?
So with the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, they showed an efficacy rate of about 52%. So you're 52% protected from the virus with that first dose. They showed that out of the coronavirus cases that they did have, they only had one case of severe disease after that first dose of the vaccine. So you had a fair amount of protection after that first dose, certainly, and that was the mark that they were looking for, actually. So their goal was a 50% effectiveness, and they got that with the first dose. The thing that happens after the first dose that we don't know how long that lasts. So what we'd like to do is prime the immune system again and hit it with another presentation very quickly after the first presentation. And then hopefully what we get there is a long-lasting or a longer-lasting immunity. And so that's really the reason to give the second shot. Not only do we get a more effective immune response, hopefully we get an immune response that's longer lasting as well. But certainly you have some protection somewhere between a week and 2 weeks after the first dose. You're going to see some protection as well, significant reduction.
So I think another thing that I think about is, why should we as individuals get this vaccine? And I will just say that for myself, I want to be able to hug my parents. I want to be able to not worry about getting my patients sick. And I want my kids to be in normal school. So.
Yeah, so many things like that, to be able to reconnect with people. I think that's super important, and we're really missing those things to be able to do those now. And so there's that human side of it, and that emotional and spiritual connection with people that I think that we're missing to a certain degree now in this sort of environment. And heaven knows we don't need any less connectivity, as far as the people that we deal with. I think that in this digital world, this is what we've come up with, is people are way less connected than they should be. And so that's terrible. I think the other thing that I think about, when we're trying to get, the reasons to try to get to herd immunity are some of the things that we've heard about here lately with these new mutant and variant strains that may be more infective, potentially maybe, more dangerous. Some people are talking about that. I think the jury's still out. But one of the things that happens with these RNA viruses is their genetic material, the messenger RNA, is not very good at maintaining the message, and so it tends to variate as you go through. The more times you replicate, the more chances you are to have some type of mutation. Now, the majority of those mutations are going to be nonsensical. They'll either produce no change, or they'll produce a change that's maybe deleterious. But, the problem for us is, the more we roll the dice, the more we allow this virus to continue to replicate over and over and over again. It's, eventually you're going to roll snake eyes on this deal, and you're going to end up with a virus that is perhaps more deadly, more transmissible, all of those things. And so the quicker we can stop that viral replication, the better off we are. We don't want to just let it burn through a community, because that's how we get these mutants and variants that then change things, and then change its ability to be controlled by a vaccine, perhaps changes its virulence. And so all of those things are other reasons that we need to get the vaccine, get this thing under control, where we don't have to deal with those mutations moving forward.
So I think the short message of that is, let's get the vaccine so we can get this under control faster, so that we don't have the possibility of these terrible mutations that may be worse.
Sure.
So when do we get to stop wearing masks?
Yeah.
I don't get to get my second dose and they go, okay, I'm free.
So here's a thing. I think the thing that is the toughest thing to think about. And so what we know about the vaccine is, the vaccine keeps you from one, getting severe disease, or getting symptomatic disease. We don't know if you could have asymptomatic disease with the vaccine. And the other thing we don't know, if you do have asymptomatic disease rather, can you transmit? We don't know. And so those studies, again, are ongoing. And so, we as a scientific community, we are going to have a better understanding of that as we move forward. And so, but those are the keys. You may be asymptomatic, and you might still be able to infect someone from an asymptomatic standpoint. We just don't know yet. And so I think we can't say for sure, hey, get your second dose and throw your mask away. I think there's still some element that we have to be aware of. But I do think that the good news is I think you'll be able to loosen up some. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
around a bunch of people that have been vaccinated, I mean, I would see that. I mean, in everything, you have to sort of assess risk versus benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I have 2 vaccine doses, my parents have 2 doses of vaccine, we're probably going to be a little looser about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the good news is, hey, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So I
Yes.
don't think it's going to be you get your vaccine and you wear your mask for the next 10 years, but you still have to be cognizant of it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's sometimes where the discomfort lies for the general public is, they're living through the scientific method right now. And that's uncomfortable because there's a lot that we don't know because it's a new virus. And, we don't have the answers to every single question yet. And there is a process for us to learn those answers. It's just, when the virus came, it didn't come with a rule book of how we were going to manage it and who's going to be exempt and all these kind of things. It just came and we have to figure it out. And I think, we as human beings will get it wrong sometimes. And I think that is the beauty of science, is that it is self-correcting, that when we continue to look at the data and dig into that information and make observations and predictions and see if we're correct or not, that we find out the answers to those questions. So
Absolutely.
So I will ask, how have you personally been impacted by this pandemic? And I didn't say this, I should have said that Lance Faddis, who is also the father of a horde of children and, has many hats that he wears in the world. And so, I think, well, I'll not put words in your mouth. How has this impacted you?
Sure. I mean, it does. I mean, of course, you're always worried about your kids, and even when I know the facts that, the chances of my kids having, a bad outcome from this are low, that doesn't change the worry for me. And so I think that is a big worry. My son did have coronavirus. He contracted it while he was at college. He is a runner, runs cross country for his college, and so that's a big deal. There's a significant chance of myocarditis with this, and if you have myocarditis, you're at increased risk of having sudden cardiac death, which would that's just unrecoverable. And so those kind of things, so there's always that. I have, some of my kids have asthma, and so I worry about those things, pre-existing conditions. My parents are, surprisingly not young, but they, even though they act like it, and they have pre-existing health conditions. My mom has an immune deficiency. That's my father-in-law has an immune deficiency. And so my brother-in-law has an immune deficiency. So there's a significant number of things of that nature that we've had to deal with as a family, and just how do we work through that, and stay connected. And then just how do I take care of patients on a day-to-day basis? How do I make sure that I don't harm them, first of all, and that I don't get it wrong, that they don't call me with something and I am not able to see them, or how do I recognize when they do call and they don't want to come in? How do I convince them that, yeah, I really think I need to see you today because this could be something else, and we've had those, we've had to have some discussions, and I think there's certainly people who have succumbed to the coronavirus without ever having it. They didn't come in to get their health care when they should have. They ignored that chest discomfort that probably they needed to come in and be seen about. That little spot that they have been looking at for a while, they just decided, no, wait, and maybe they didn't need to. And so that's been a personal impact for me, just thinking about those instances and how do we keep those from happening and moving forward.
I think that it has been I feel like sometimes the general public does not actually see the weight that we carry with us every day, because it's not just our family that we're worried about. It is the people that we've been taking care of for a decade plus, that we know every member of that family. And we know that, Grandma Sue has lymphoma or whatever, and we worry about her too. And then we find out that her grandson gets COVID or something. It's all of those things. And it is the weight of the responsibility to deal with this enormous problem at hand. And I know it is weighed on us all. So I would ask, what would your call to action be for those in the community? Like, what can they do to make a difference right now?
So I think, with the degree of spread that we're seeing in the community right now, we've got a problem. I mean, it's really, really rampant in the community right now. So really paying attention to the guidelines, to the things that are out there, doing your best to socially distance. And I think, unfortunately, as things get worse, that's one of the biggest things that we can do, and maybe one of the only things we can do. And sometimes, and so we had to increase that social distance when the caseload gets heavier. And so just bearing that in mind, wearing the mask and wearing the mask properly. Your nose is connected to your lungs. You got to cover that. And so it's a big deal to wear that properly. I realize it's uncomfortable. I wear one every day, all day long. It's one of those things that I've just had to learn to live with. And so for right now, focusing on, if you're indoors in a tight space, you need to have that mask on. Continuing to wash your hands, but particularly the distancing and the masking. I would say, please pay attention to those things. It is important. It does work. I mean, we're seeing it, right? What's happened now with influenza? We don't have it.
Not a lot.
So that is significant. We are seeing that it's making a difference in respiratory viruses. Now, COVID is much more transmissible than influenza. It's got a higher R naught value. So so if we weren't doing these things, we'd have worse issues with coronavirus. And that's pretty clear, I think, from the data. So we are making a difference, and just continue to work through that process and use use good judgment, and think about, do I need to do that, or should I do that? If you're sick, hey, don't be out. The number one thing that I hear from patients who have coronavirus is, I don't have coronavirus, I've got a cold.
Yes. How many times do we hear that a day? I don't think it's I think it's sinuses.
Yeah, it's my sinuses. It's allergies. It's January. Nothing blooms in January. It's not your allergy. Just think about those. Exactly. Yeah. It's my allergies. I get once a year. So.
So one, I think that unfortunately a lot of people have felt that this whole thing has been very politicized, and I am not going to out you and your political leanings, but I think that we have lots and lots of things in common, and maybe see things a little bit differently at times. But I think that this is an issue that crosses party lines. This is a healthcare issue. This is a human issue. And unfortunately, it is affected by our political leadership. So if there were something you could ask of our state or federal legislators, or our governor, or anybody, what would you ask of them right now?
So I think the biggest thing that I would ask is that we continue to emphasize the seriousness of where we are. I don't think that can be emphasized enough. Let's not minimize it. Let's be truthful and honest about where we are. Our case numbers are high. They just are. There's no way around
they're
it.
terrible.
We need to be honest about that. And the reality is that the more cases we have right now, if our, rates hold, and if we think the actual mortality rate of this virus may be somewhere around, 0.16, could be higher, could be up to 2, but might be a little less, but probably is going to end up, I think when it's all said, end up somewhere in that range. So that's 16 people dead for every 1,000 people that contract this virus. 16. And that's terrible. That's too many, and they're not all old. And I hear that, and so.
And even those old people, those are people that we love and care about. Like, absolutely. That's my dad.
Yes.
That's absolutely. Your mom.
Yes. And I despise those things, when people say that, well, it's just this, or it's just that, or it's just that category. It's just this category. Well, what difference does that make? How would you like to be in that category? That's your neighbor, that's your brother, that's your aunt, that's your uncle, that's your mom or your dad, and so you can place these people in categories, but that's wrong. These people are humans, and 16 out of 1,000 humans that get this virus are going to die, and that's the reality. And so, and that's low. I get, people say, well, it's just low, but it's still too many, when we can do something to prevent it.
It's not that low when you look at how many people across the country have it. That's a lot of people.
Well, I tell people all the time, they want to get, like when I'm giving them, there's a particular vaccine that we give that 1 out of 100,000 people get encephalitis from it. But if you're that one, it's 100%, and so you just can't, you can't think about it that way. But it's just, and so I would ask that our political leaders continue to emphasize the seriousness of where we are, and I think there's a difference between, being fear-mongering and being strictly serious about where we are. I'm not asking somebody to be, to be Chicken Little, but I do think that we need to be dead level honest about how this works and about where we are, and our hospital beds are tight, and our coworkers that we work with every day are tired, and they're pressured. And I don't care who you are or how committed you are to the job. And I think that we work with some of the finest healthcare providers in the world right here in Northwest Arkansas. But however committed you are, when you're that tired, when you're that worked, when you're that stressed, you cannot do your best work. And when that happens, then the care drops off, no matter who you are. Right? It drops off in our clinic, in your and I's clinic. It drops off in the hospital. It drops off wherever you are when you're working in that kind of environment.
And in the hospital, there's limitations on the resources that we have and the human resources. And we know that as nurses have more and more patients, the outcomes are much worse because you physically you can't take care of that many critically ill patients at once. You can't. You can't do it and do a good job. So do you feel like you've got time for a couple of questions that people sent in?
You bet.
All right. So is there somewhere you are supposed to register for the vaccine, or how do you know when it's your turn and where to go to get it?
So this week in the governor's press conference, they talked a fair amount about this. And so I would encourage folks, if you don't watch those, are every Tuesday, typically around the 1 o'clock hour. And so they do update on a lot of the things that are going on statewide and with the Department of Health. So I would encourage you, it's on their website. You can look at it anytime after 1 o'clock. It's on ASAT's YouTube channel. So I would encourage you to go to that and look at it. But they're in the process of developing a plan that's going to be having all that information out there. I think it's, as you see these switches from categories 1A, 1B, 1C, so on and so forth, those messages will be put out. I would tell you that there are, right now, one of the plans is for some of this vaccination to be done through our local pharmacies. And so I think there's 6 pharmacies in Benton County who have been designated. So I would, that information is also on the Arkansas Department of Health website. And so I would be in contact with those pharmacies and just see where they are in the process.
And
because when we get to those categories, you'd probably call them to set that up.
And I will drop a link to that. There's a document that lists all of the designated pharmacies in the state. And so I can drop that link under this video if anybody wants access to that information. And there is tons of good data on the Arkansas Department of Health website, including, I mean, even treatment options if you're just a curious person. I mean, it's super helpful for those of us who are in practice, but it's also, you know, people have lots of questions, and it's a good, reliable source of information. And I would also just like to add, please, people, be careful about where you're getting your information. And I think that a really good site is the Department of Health for webpage to get reliable COVID information. And, you know, Joe Bob, the mechanic, may be a wonderful mechanic, but might not be the best source to get COVID information off of social media from. Or ask your primary care provider. They're lovely people that are happy to help you. Due to the slowness of the vaccine rollout, what happens if you're late getting your second dose? Are you able to get a shot of Pfizer and then Moderna? And I'll just leave it at that.
So I think as far as slowness of rollout, I don't think that's going to affect first and second dose, or it hasn't so far. I mean, we're really only into the first dose. I mean, we were one of the first, you know, I think there were a few people vaccinated a day or two before we were. And so, you know, from that standpoint, we haven't seen any effect as far as getting the first or the second dose. Now, the deal on Pfizer versus Moderna, you know, can I get one, or can I get one and then get the other? It wasn't studied that way. And so
No.
You really need, even though they're similar in what they're doing, you really, if you get the Pfizer vaccine, you need to get the Pfizer vaccine the second time. And so when you schedule an appointment for your first vaccine and get your first dose, you will be given a follow-up appointment for your second dose. And so that's how all this is being organized within this state. So that won't happen another way inside of here. Now, there are, it's my understanding that in some other countries, I think the UK, there's been some instances where they've given one time one and one time the other. But I don't know, but again, those aren't studied, and I don't know that they're even looking at those, but I know it has happened in some of those other countries, but I don't, it's certainly not recommended. They studied, and when we talk about vaccine safety, right, we get vaccine safety because we study the vaccine a certain way on a large number of people. Mm-hmm. And so when you start monkeying around with the doses and all that stuff, then you're getting outside of that safety protocol. Might it work? It might, but we don't have any real guarantees for that. Mm-hmm. And so from a safety protocol, we don't really advise that.
And someone else said, I have a lot of worry over several of my African-American friends who have told me they do not trust the vaccine. They mentioned the Tuskegee experiment, which, for those who don't know, was a terrible, terrible thing that occurred in this country, where African-American men specifically who had syphilis were denied treatment, never told that they had syphilis, and they continued to just study the effects as syphilis ravaged their bodies. And, this is something that was easily treated with penicillin. So there's real fears out there and real concern when historically people that look like you have been harmed by terrible medical experiments. And fortunately now there are ethics boards in place that review these kind of things so that cannot happen. But to the question, was this study set up to include African Americans and diversity of age and gender and all of those important demographic pieces?
Yes, and that's one of the big things with this study is they were very intentional about that. Um, you know, I completely understand that there is distrust among lots of different communities, of different ethnicities when you talk about moving forward, even from our Marshallese community, from the Latino community, all those places. And I think the good news is with this particular vaccine study, they studied it well across different ethnicities, across different genders, across at least a semi-wide variety of ages. And when I say that, again, they didn't study it in children, but they did study it in folks from 18 to 25, and they had a good group from 25 to 45, and then from 45 to 65, and then from 65 on up. So they had significant numbers in each of those age groups in different genders and from different ethnicities. And I think they did a really good job of doing that. And so I feel good about the safety of this vaccine. And I think honestly too, one, I hope and I do feel that we've come a long way from that. And we are doing a much better job of policing ourselves as far as those kinds of things go. And frankly, everybody in the scientific community knows that there's a tremendous amount on the line. We've been frankly very vilified in a lot of the publicity about this, and that's been difficult to deal with. And so, so certainly from a scientific community standpoint, they knew that there was significant pressure to get this right. And frankly, those kind of things always get found out. When that kind of stuff happens, it gets found out, and your sin will find you out. I believe that, and so that's, they knew that, and they paid attention to that. And so I really feel like they did a good job with that.
And I think we also, fortunately, as a society, have people in roles in the scientific and medical community who are more diverse. And so I think when you add that diversity to the medical community, you're going to have better and different questions asked. And so I was glad that was intentionally done.
Sure.
So someone asked, does Arkansas have the Moderna vaccine available? Yes. And have there been any cases of anaphylactic shock in this vaccine?
There have. And so when you look at the total number of doses that's been given, so around, again, between high 4s, low 5 million doses given right now. The latest numbers that I saw today, there was about 11 point something episodes of anaphylaxis per million doses given with this vaccine. So I think that's a real good breakdown. 11 reactions per 1 million. Now, none of those reactions were fatal, and that's good. All those were treated. And so none of the data that I saw indicated there was any fatalities with anaphylaxis reaction. And that's the reason we say, hey, we're going to monitor you when you get this shot. We're going to set you down and we're going to watch you. And those vaccine reactions occur in a specific time frame, and they're able to be treated if you're being monitored. And that's frankly one of the things that makes this logistically difficult. Right? Because I can't just give you that shot and wave by, you've got to sit down and be watched for a period of time. And so you have to be able to do that in a socially distanced fashion. So there's lots of that's what all these things, we're doing all that to look, because of safety. But I think overall, the anaphylactic reaction rate is low and so far has been very treatable.
We have some really good questions. So here's another one. Hearing different thoughts on when friends that tested positive for COVID-19 should get the vaccine. Should they wait 90 days? And I know somebody else, my cousin is a physical therapist who had COVID, and she was told 60 days. So what is the right answer?
That's
I disagreed with her, and I told her, I was like, 90.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. And I don't know that I've heard anybody say the exact answer to when they would say to get the vaccine. Now,
I think
if you had monoclonal antibodies, that's a deal. That's a 90-day deal. And if you have the steroids, that can change that. But I haven't seen any data on that on the other.
So I think it was the NIH that I found the answer to that. And their recommendation was 90 days. And it was more as not necessarily a safety thing, but that they assumed that you would probably have protective antibodies after you've had it. And that was around the time that you would have waning antibodies. And so their recommendation was 90 days and let somebody else get the vaccine first.
Yeah.
So
now that part I probably would agree with. Certainly, yeah, the idea of you having antibodies. I know I have seen people. I've seen people that have gotten the vaccine before 90 before 90 days is up, who were positive for coronavirus, and they did not have any any more reaction than the general other person so far from the people that I know that have had the vaccine before 90 days.
What about someone with autoimmune disease and being fearful of a severe reaction to this vaccine?
So what we're seeing primarily from an anaphylactic reaction, they think it's if you had an issue with like you had an allergy to, say, penicillin or to some other kind of injectable drug, or you'd have those might be issues. But as far as immune deficiency, and they certainly had some folks, and I don't know the numbers on that right offhand, but there were folks that had immune deficiencies in some of these studies. So it was not there's not an increased risk associated with immune deficiency, and probably there's a significant risk of contracting COVID and having an immune deficiency. So I think your risk from immune deficiency standpoint would be much higher contracting wild type COVID than it would be getting the vaccine.
Let's see. I think some of these questions are sort of already answered. Some questions on if you've had a reaction to vaccines. If they had a reaction to the flu vaccine, can they go ahead and get the COVID vaccine and expect the same kind of reaction?
So it depends on what kind of reaction they're talking about, to the flu vaccine. But in general, this is a completely different technology, and so it doesn't work in the same fashion at all. So there are. It's not grown in the same type of cells. It's just not the same. And so there's really nothing that would connect those two in that way. Now, if you're talking about, when I got the flu vaccine, I got a sore arm and I was a little achy and I had a fever, potentially, yes, that kind of reaction you can have. But as far as, hey, I had, a significant reaction to influenza. I'm allergic to the influenza vaccine, et cetera. That it's a completely different technology, completely different set of making it. And so that should not interfere at all.
So I think, like, if someone has questions, they should probably get some specific advice from their primary care provider who can know their history and their story and figure out if that's appropriate or not. Do you have to have a negative COVID test before you get the vaccine? No, you do not. And then lots of praise and gratitude for us being such amazing healthcare workers.
Kirk and Jennifer are commenting. Is that what you're saying?
No, it wasn't our spouses either. I think they would have been the peanut gallery anyway. So I think that's probably a good note to end on. And I certainly really appreciate you doing this. I think it is needed. I think there's a tremendous amount of incorrect information out in the world. And, I think it's good to have these conversations with normal humans who live in the community in which you live. And, this is what we do for a living. And so it's good to have these conversations. and know where to go to get good info. So I thank each and
Thank
every
you
one
for
of
having me.
you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining us. Stay safe out there, wear your mask, wash your hands, watch your distance, and get your vaccine as soon as you can.